before we get to the failed Allied raid on France in August 1942. What would have happened if the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944 ended in failure? In collaboration with this video, check out this very scenario from Monsieur Z, who deals with alternate timelines for history's most important events. Be sure to check out the link in the description. In early 1942, World War II wasn't going too well for the Allies against Nazi Germany. The Nazis were deep within Soviet territory, and the Western Allies were making little or no progress in North Africa or Western Europe. Joseph Stalin was desperate for the Allies to launch a second front in Northwest Europe to help alleviate the mounting pressure on the Soviet army and citizens. Finally, a decision was made by the Allied High Command to launch an assault on German-occupied France that was slated to begin in early July 1942. The coastal town of Dieppe, France, was chosen for the amphibious raid. A full-scale invasion of Western Europe wasn't feasible at the time, so a smaller-scale invasion was planned. It was initially called Operation Rudder. There were around 4 main objectives of Operation Rudder. The first was to launch a Western front in Europe, to draw German resources away from fighting the Russians. The second objective was to seize and maintain control over a major port for a period of time, to prove that the Allies could actually do it, and to gain intelligence. Next was to destroy coastal defenses and strategic buildings during the planned withdrawal when the mission was completed. Finally, it was also proposed to boost morale of the Allies in a war that wasn't going very well for them at the time. British Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery's Southeastern Command provided the troops for the operation, and it was decided that the 2nd Canadian Division were to make up the main bulk of the invading force, with around 5,000 men. The Canadian government had been pushing for its troops to see action in the war. For up until that time, they had been training in the UK for 2 years, and hadn't seen any real combat yet. Other forces taking part were 1,000 British troops and 50 US Army Rangers. Included were 237 ships and landing craft, and 74 squadrons of aircraft, of which 66 were fighter squadrons. The raid was now called Operation Jubilee, and it started in the early morning hours of August 19, 1942. The landing points were given color-coded names, with the initial assault beginning at 4:50 a.m., with flanking attacks on 4 coastal batteries. At Orange Beach, No. 4 Commando was the only unit that captured all of its objectives that day when they neutralized the enemy guns. They were forced to withdraw under fire from superior forces. However, at Blue Beach, the Royal Regiment of Canada arrived late and was annihilated by German machine gun fire, as just 60 out of 543 men were later extracted from the beach. At Green Beach, the South Saskatchewan Regiment arrived on time, but landed in the wrong spot. Because of this, they had to cross a heavily defended bridge, but began to be gunned down by enemy machine and artillery fire. The Cameron Highlanders were right behind them, but both were forced to withdraw after unable to reach their target. Some Cameron Highlanders managed to penetrate further inland than any other troops that day, but were forced back by German reinforcements. A half-hour later, the main frontal assault commenced by the Essex Scottish Regiment and the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, supported by 27 tanks of the 14th Canadian Army Tank Regiment. The tracks on most of the tanks were stripped as they were driven onto the shingle beach, and soon became sitting ducks for German anti-tank guns. The tanks that actually crossed the seawall were stopped by concrete roadblocks. The infantry units were gunned down on the beach by vicious crossfire from machine guns hidden in the cliffs. Supporting fire from warships was far too light to make a difference in the battle. Canadian Major General J.H. Roberts, who was in charge of the ground troops, could not see the objectives because of the smoke screen laid down by ships to support the landing crafts. He was unaware of the chaos on the beaches, and made the fateful mistake to send in 2 reserve units into certain failure. The 1st unit of the Mount Royal Riflemen quickly became pinned down underneath the cliffs after going straight into the center of the town. They became trapped and easy targets for the German machine gunners. The Royal Marine Commandos sent in to support them had been given their new mission at the last minute, and their transfer to landing boats ended in chaos. Many boats ended up getting hit by enemy fire and became disabled before getting to shore. Those that made it onto the beach almost immediately ended up getting killed or captured. By 11 a.m., the withdrawing of Allied forces had begun, and it was completed by 2 p.m. 3,367 Canadians out of 5,000 were either killed, wounded, or captured, The British commandos suffered 275 casualties, and the U.S. Army Rangers suffered 17. The Royal Navy lost 1 destroyer, 33 landing craft, and 550 casualties, along with the Royal Air Force losing 106 aircraft. The German losses throughout the battle were 48 planes and 591 casualties. The raid was a complete disaster in almost every way for the Allies. There are many reasons why the mission was probably doomed from the start. Because of continuing bad weather, the invasion kept getting postponed, and at that point General Montgomery wanted the operation called off altogether, fearing leaks of the attack would get out. However, he was soon transferred to Egypt to command the 8th Army, and wasn't involved in the planning any longer. The delay in the mission also allowed the Germans a longer time to get ready for an invasion force by the Allies they believed might be coming at any moment. The decision to raid Dieppe in the first place was a result of poor planning, as military officials knew fully well that it was a heavily guarded port, but still went after it anyways. Surprisingly, the area was assessed using holiday postcards from travelers, which made enemy strength and terrain highly underestimated. German gun positions along the cliffs were not spotted by Allied air photographers. Also, the idea in attacking a beach with cliffs was a horrible decision because it gave the Germans a significant higher ground advantage against attackers. Furthermore, Major General Roberts was on a ship with poor communication abilities and didn't know how badly the mission was proceeding before making strategic decisions. To add to all of its planning problems, a number of changes were made that led to the complete failure of the mission. First, the planned massive aerial bombardment of the defenses was now reduced due to the fear of civilian casualties. Larger battleships due to attack the enemy positions were replaced by smaller destroyers off the coast because they were deemed too vulnerable to enemy fire. A parachute operation on the flanks was also called off, to be replaced by Army commando raids straight onto the targets. Finally, the Germans were on high alert after French double agents warned that Dieppe was of high interest to the British. After the battle and throughout the war, Allied leaders, including Winston Churchill, tried to put a positive spin on the outcome of the battle, saying that they learned valuable lessons that were incorporated into the success of D-Day nearly 2 years later. However, Operation Jubilee really had no chance of success even before it was launched. Many believe the lessons learned from the battle were mostly common sense and did not need the utter failure of the raid to prove them. British General Sir Leslie Hollis, deputy head of the military wing of the War Cabinet, judged the operation as a complete failure. He commented that the many lives that were sacrificed in attempting it were lost with no tangible result.